All right, good morning, everybody. I'd like to start off the morning with a few comments from myself. So my name is Frank Sue. I'm one of the Canada's free agents and also a Leaders GC collaborator. I'm proud to say that I'm here with two of my colleagues, Walid Sharif and Mary Lestage, also Leaders GC collaborators. On behalf of the BC Federal Council and the Pacific Innovation Fair, I'd like to welcome you to our session this morning, and glad that you're here with us. Leaders GC is a non-profit grassroots organization that connects public servants throughout Canada, led by a team of dedicated volunteer collaborators. Leaders GC provides a platform for public servants and all Canadians to engage with senior decision makers. This is a very special chat for us, as is the first one in the Pacific region and one of the very few that hasn't taken place in Ottawa. Today's chat is about innovation happens at all levels and has a great lineup of guests. So we have today with us Dr. Stephen Lucas, Deputy Minister of Environment and Climate Change Canada. As a Senior Associate Deputy Minister at Climate Change from June 2016 to January 2017, and Dr. Lucas has led ECCC activities in support of the development and adoption of Pan-Canadian Framework on Clean Growth and Climate Change. That's one of the few things he's done. We also have Sylvie Berube, the Assistant Deputy Minister of Employment and Social Development Canada. Sylvie is a national co-champion for employee engagement on service transformation. As a leader, Sylvie values diverse perspectives and supports an inclusive work environment that invests in its employees. She is the BC Federal Council's champion for GovernX, the new professionals development network, and takes an active role in employee mentorship. Thank you, Sylvie. We also have Dr. Judy Beck, Director General for the Canadian Forest Service and Natural Resources Canada. Dr. Beck has a passion for engaging leadership and building learning organizations and enabling a culture of continuous improvement and excellence in research, forestry, and forest governance. She has managed research programs that address science issues in a variety of disciplines within the forestry sector, including genomics, wildland fire, bioenergy, soil productivity, and pathology. Thank you. And finally, we have Tim Phillips, the Director at Canada Revenue Agency. Tim is the Director of Programs for the Pacific region of the Canada Revenue Agency, and he's the creator of the Idea Journey, an approach to inspiring innovation in government. Tim is also the recipient of the 2002 CRA Award of Excellence and the 2003 Public Service Award for Excellence, both in the category of innovation. So thank you for joining us today. And our moderator for today's session is Walid Sharif, one of our Leaders GC collaborators, and he's the Senior Advisor to the Vice President of the Canada School of Public Service. So over to you, Walid, for the rest of the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frank. Folks, thank you very much for joining us. We have a full house. I know you cannot see it on our live stream today, but we have a full house in this room. We have a standing room only. And I really would like to thank our guests today for joining us, and I appreciate your time. Je m'appelle Walid Sharif, et pendant les prochaines 75 minutes, je vais essayer de gérer cette discussion. We're here on the West Coast, in the beautiful city of Vancouver, at the Pacific Innovation Fair. Since we are a Twitter chat, we want to make sure that we're pointing out some of the handles as well. So for the BC Feds, it's the PAC Innovation is the handle. The Leaders GC is a handle for the virtual chat today. And we have folks taking part in this event from across the country. If you have any questions for our panelists, please direct them via Twitter to our direct message on Leaders GC account. Don't forget, it is not rude to be on your phones. It is a Leaders GC chat, so we understand if you're on your phones and typing away the responses.
Except for us.
Of course. And a warm welcome to all our viewers from across the country. Today's chat is being live streamed on YouTube, and there have been a number of viewing rooms have been set up across the country, and a welcome to the chat. I would like to ask the panelists and tell us the time, tell us why you're interested in innovation, and as a public service executive, what motivates you the most? Tim, Steve, would you please?
Sure. I think, to me, innovation is just about continually pushing on to improve. It's kind of a journey of continuous improvement. It can be new ideas, it can be big, they can be small, it can be a new process or practice, it can be cutting some administrative burden or changing how we address climate change in the country, which I have the great privilege of being involved in. I mean, in terms of what motivates me, I'm a committed public servant. And so the opportunity, and I would argue responsibility, to think about how to kind of push ahead, bring in new ideas, create space and the environment for others to be creative and innovate is rewarding in itself, and having the opportunity to be involved in doing that on things that are important to Canada and Canadians is both a great privilege and extraordinarily rewarding. And through our conversation, it's great to bring out some of those examples, because some are big things like a climate change plan for the country. Other ones are smaller things, just making the processes of how we approve dockets in the department a lot easier, and so people have a sense of how it's done, how it can be done faster, and what the end result is. And just a big shout out to all the students and youth. ECC one's amazing booth, but great commitment to helping support innovation, and encourage you to stand up. I'll just end saying that I think being creative is really a responsibility, and there's a key element of just doing it to some degree, asking permission later.
Very well. Judy, would you like to?
Sure.
Yes, please.
Oh.
Yeah, so we could just use the mics for everybody. For our YouTube audience, we're having trouble picking up the sound, so if we could use the mics.
Excellent.
Thank you.
We might need some technical help.
Oh, press and hold.
We should be on now. There we go. Innovation. So for me, from a absolutely purely selfish perspective, I'm in my happy place when I'm creative. And I guess to make it all the more meaningful, I'm really interested in doing that for the greater good, fundamentally. And I think that was instilled in me at a very young age. And my grandmother had an adage that she rung into us as children, and it went like this: good, better, best, never let it rest until the good is better and the better is the best. And so my grandparents would have instilled in me that desire to be creative, face a problem or a challenge, and find a solution. And that's what innovation's all about. But it's also about moving the bench forward in and around advancing those things. So fundamentally, that's about it.
So for me, so I have a 32-year career in the federal public service, and basically started off as in the proverbial mailroom. So I've worked my way through. And along that journey, for me, I've seen innovation happen at all levels. It didn't have anything to do with title. Innovation for me is about how do you improve what's already going on, coming in with your best ideas and thinking of ways to just contribute to the greater good and to the work that's being done. So for me, it just is, so I had a big department out in Western Canada with over 5,200 employees, delivering $34 billion in benefits, 110 Service Canada centers. And in all of that, if we are just waiting for the big ideas to move us forward, we're going to miss the boat on a daily basis. And so innovation for me happens at all levels. And what motivates me is to try and promote those best conditions where people can come with their ideas, surface them, we can discuss them, and see how we can move them forward. So it's about supporting the workforce and bringing forward those ideas, and how can we then bring that into changing how we serve Canadians.
Thanks, Sophie. I just find it exciting. I mean, like, you know, in our business, and you know, I work for CRA, and we're in the tax administration business, and that's exciting, some of the time, but sometimes it's it's not, and so it gives, being focused on innovation or committed to doing things differently or creating new things, it just makes your contribution just that much more exciting. I mean, I find over the years I found I've just had a more curious mind about things, on how things operate and how they work and how they can that other folks' ideas and you know, like Sylvia says, you know, it is at all levels. It is throughout our organization. We have a very big organization as well, and it's just there is an element of excitement to it when everybody is contributing to something in a very different way that you couldn't have possibly thought about, and as a result, we've had a number of successes in that. But I just generally find it quite exciting to devote some level of effort to that part of the job.
Thank you very much, Tim. That's great. So we do have a number of questions for our panelists, but they will also be taking questions from the room and also from our virtual audience. For the virtual audience, I just want to point out that please make sure you direct message your question via Twitter to our Leaders GC account, and where we will be reviewing those questions and having them forwarded to me. So for our first question, let's get started for the first one. Tell us about the time you were encouraged to be creative and felt supported to put an idea into action. How did it make you feel?
So like some of my colleagues, I just come at being creative by nature. I'm a scientist, similar to Judy by background, and so it's part and parcel of the work. But I mean, I think more fundamentally, being creative and putting ideas into action isn't something that necessarily happens at one point in time. So the illustration I'm going to give, and in this case I didn't necessarily ask permission for it, is when I was at Health Canada in the Food and Drug Regulation area, we were looking at how to improve the pharmaceutical system of drug approval in Canada, and focusing in particular on how long it takes to approve drugs. At the same time, we were hearing a lot from patient groups and the public about, well, what do we really know about how those drugs behave when they're out in the market, and are we getting the right pharmaceuticals to address public health challenges both in Canada and internationally? And so I said, well, let's kind of just start some think tank sessions, bring in some people, talk to internal staff, and just start forming an ideas bank. Didn't know exactly where it was going to go, but we thought there's other things we need to get to. And so, you know, I said, let's kind of create this. We'll nurture it, and when the time is right, then we can put it into action. And, you know, about 18 months later, there was an openness from the government of the day, and we went out and did some broad public discussions on a blueprint to reform the regulatory system for pharmaceuticals, which is a key area that touches on the life and health and safety of people every day. So, you know, again, that edge of being open to innovation, generating ideas, and then waiting for the moment to kind of plug them into action is a key part of the process. And as a leader, and I agree, it's leadership at all levels, you need to create that environment where people feel safe and supported to do that. And then when it's time to run, you know, create the ability to kind of run with the ball.
Would you like to add to that? Did you have a similar experience?
Thank you, Waleed. I was thinking, as hearing Stephen talk about time with an idea, I will say that I have so many to draw upon. Perhaps one of the greater challenges is when I'd first moved. So I worked in Ottawa for 10 years of my career and 20 years in a regional setting, and had come out to, was working in Vancouver in the late 90s at the time when the Vancouver Health Authority had declared a public health emergency with respect to all of the injection drug use that was happening in the downtown east side of Vancouver. It wasn't my own unique idea, but what it meant is that it was around working with 3 levels of government and working with non-governmental organizations around how could we utilize our resources more effectively together. So instead of work happening sort of in isolation, it was an effort to bring together everybody, and we had a common goal and a common focus, which meant that a lot of the obstacles and barriers sort of melted away. And I think part of the reason I brought that example forward is that in innovation and being innovative, it's often there are 12 people telling you why you can't do something and 2 people telling you why you can. And I wanted, my message for you is try to be the 2 who are saying why you can do it, not the 12 saying why you can't. And by leveraging all of the resources, we were able to make, I think, great strides. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is. But for me, I felt that we were supported. We worked very well with colleagues in Ottawa, colleagues here in the region, with the province, with the city. So for me, that's the experience that I would bring forward. And where we supported, it was about making sure everybody was aware of what was going on, which is also important in trying out new ways of doing business.
Yeah, Willie, on that question, what I can share is in about the same era that Sylvia was speaking about it. We had a situation where the old configuration of supply rooms in every office and cumbersome sort of ordering mechanisms and stuff existed and was obviously had to be changed. And my contribution to that was creating something that I named Rapid Order, which occurred at a time when business to business was sort of there but not really. The internet was kind of doing its thing, but not really. But I always felt it was one of those things that was somewhat cutting edge and eliminated a bunch of supply rooms and managed to have all our offices across our region and then eventually across the country to have a more direct ordering mechanism and saved a bunch of money. The reason I share that is that 2 things about your question are interesting. One is the whole nature of being supported, and there's no way I could have done those kinds of things and experimented in that way without just tremendous support and a huge level of trust that was there among my bosses at the time. They understood what I was up to. They trusted that it would make some sense and wouldn't take more risks than were necessary. And so that level of support was absolutely essential. The other part, which I found interesting about your question, is how did you feel? And I can tell you, when you go through one of those experiences and you do something and it is primarily successful, you have an extraordinary level of pride. There's that feeling that you experience, as well as that you contributed in a very good way. You feel good about your contribution, and you feel inspired to do more. And so the 2 things about on the one hand receiving that support, and on the other hand being able to deliver and having those kinds of feelings as an outcome. I always reflect back on that as being a very good time for innovation and the support around that.
Thank you very much, Tim. Julie, would you like to add to that one as well?
I suppose the context for me around biggest opportunities for innovation were when I was working for the provincial government as a very young, starting in my public service career. And I worked in wildland fire management and forestry. And I actually came into the business as a doctorate, and the first time they actually had hired a woman into that kind of a science position within a very operational organization, and helped them introduce the concept of having a fire behavior specialist work with an incident management team out in the field to forecast where the fire is going to go, for 2 primary reasons. One was for firefighter safety, and the second was for community safety and evacuations. The role had never been defined before, and I was clearly an outcast. I used to crack jokes about being, if the ratio was less than 1 to 500, I was disappointed with the boys in the room. So this was a pretty novel construct, but I had 4 other characters across Canada that helped me build some training and implement that and have the role accepted across Canada. How did I feel? It was definitely, pushing spaghetti uphill for a long time. The old guard felt you should just know how to do this and trust my gut in this process. And I was trying to introduce an evidence base and science into that practice. So it was a challenge for the first few years. And you felt very alone being at the forefront of that initiative. Soon, you've gathered your red tomatoes, which are the ripe ones that are ready for the progress. And Canada now has probably over 350 trained fire behavior specialists working operation across the country. So,
Well, that's an amazing experience. And I think something that Tim as well mentioned is sometimes leadership is also how much you are not in the way when something innovative is happening. And that's something that I've heard some leaders as well mention, is there's a very fine balance as to how you want to support them and how to be sort of out of their way so that they can move that forward. I think that's a great point too. So we'll go to question number 2 on Twitter as well in a couple of minutes, but I'll ask the questions from our panelists. But if there's any questions in the audience, please come up to right up here in the front, and we can take a question next. Question number 2, which is coming out also on Twitter as well, is what is the most innovative, big or small, activity or policy you have experienced in the public service? And I know you also have experience in the provincial as well. Are there any examples like that? Judy?
So I just gave you one as an example. I suppose the latest one for me is, and you can all join us in our hashtag BCFedLeaders, which is a new initiative to try to really connect the regional group with an opportunity to share all your learnings around continuous improvement, culture, leadership, and people. And for me, that was a really big piece because it was really asking folks to engage on Twitter and use other social media mechanisms, not all of whom are familiar with that, so you need to liberate your organization and yourself to do that. But also having Deputy Dylan Jones and Sylvie as co-chair of BC Fed Leaders really just trust that we were going to try something new and that we were going to use it in the interest of trying to share our learnings and opportunities. So for all of us that are here in the room, the challenge around what we're trying to do with BC Fed Leaders is if you go to a training or a workshop or some opportunity, share the learning. Share it even if it's a bad learning and you had a bad time. Let's actually, leverage the energy and efforts. So that's kind of one of the ones that I have a passion for right now. So track us on hashtag BC Fed Leaders.
That's great. Steve, would you like that?
Sure, I'll give an example just from last year, which I think, to my mind, really shows the extraordinary capability of public servants unleashed. When you create the space for them to work together and do extraordinary things. The context is in late 2017, the Prime Minister, in framing how Canada was going to use its presidency of the G7, decided on a focus on healthy oceans. Canada, with the longest coastline in the world, extraordinary freshwater resources, has both a responsibility and an opportunity to lead. And one of the areas of focus was on marine litter, something we can see in the beaches here and sadly in sea creatures and birds that impacts from just our inability to recycle, reuse, and reduce plastics, both here and globally. And what we did, recognizing that the G7 summit was at the beginning of June, and we kind of got this challenge working with fisheries and oceans and other partners just around holiday time at the end of 2017, was just say, put a call out for micro assignments, got a team from across the department plugged in with folks across town, and went into an intense 4-month open policy development process. I kicked off, I was here with some of our team at Oceanwise with stakeholders from across the country, and we just brainstormed in late January in terms of, well, how are we going to actually deal with this and make an impact, not only domestically in the G7 context, but globally. And from that, we recognized we had to get at the whole life cycle of plastics, right? Because although they're in the oceans, choking fish, and on a path to being more prevalent by weight in oceans than fish by 2050, unless we do something about it, it's really fundamentally a problem on land. In our countries, in how we manufacture and use the stuff, and in developing countries where waste management systems just aren't present or as effective. Not that we don't have a small challenge here. We recycle less than 10% of our plastics here in Canada. So created a team. I said, just go do it in an open way, engage with industry and environmental groups, community organizations, researchers, and not only develop it in a couple months, but negotiate it internationally. And one of the things that we did is every week I would meet with them with my associate Martin Dubuc, and there were students around the table and ADMs and folks from other departments who just came into our task team. And what it did is just create that environment where we had ideas, and if it was a good idea, we just said do it. So we wanted to have, you know, a youth component, and we said go out, find some organizations, think about student engagement and getting into classrooms. And in the end, it's in our booth out here, we developed an education kit, worked with the Kielburgers and we and C-Smart from here and Oceanwise and other groups to make it real. And I think kind of the final point I'll note is there is a lot of risk in open policy development, but the reward is far greater, because the only way we're going to actually achieve things, and certainly in my area in the environment, is if you not only involve people in policy development, but you have them help shape the solutions which they're going to have to deliver, given fairly limited federal responsibilities. And so I would just say, you know, create that space. Don't turn away good ideas. Take some risks. We also had micro grants for students, effectively one-page paperwork to go out and organize community events. And I mean, some of them went really well and some didn't go as well, but we decided to do it. So the great reward is we had an Ocean Plastics Charter now supported by over 20 countries and 50 or 60 organizations globally. And I think we had an impact that is now putting pressure on governments in Canada to actually tackle the issue of plastic waste, and that environment ministers are going to deal with in a couple weeks in Halifax. So I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you very much. Sylvie, did you have?
If you, I just want to pick up on sort of the point I made earlier on. If you build the right conditions, then ideas will bubble up. I'd point to a really important piece of work that was done in Saskatchewan with the client satisfaction surveys. So we're all about providing good service to Canadians, excellence in service. Yet our tools for being able to gather information from our clients and do they think they got good service, what would that look like, was we just didn't have anything that was that easy for us to access. So part of our team came up with the idea of using a tablet, very simple, a tablet at the front of the Service Canada Centre, and where they were able to, our clients would come in, have their issue attended to, and we went from having 2 responses a month to 4,000% increase in client feedback. This was low tech, required very little investment in terms of getting it all set up. This was the just do it category, I would say, Stephen. And it's helping us in terms of how we're serving our clients, and it's also something that we're looking in terms of scaling up. For an organization the size of the one I work in, scaling up is very important. You want to create space for that creativity, but at the same time, you need to think it through and what it will look like for all across Canada. But the reason I bring that forward, it's a small example, but it's powerful when you look at how we can just really leverage existing technology and immediately be able to bring that into how can we serve Canadians more effectively.
Thank you very much, Sylvie. I think we do have a question from the audience. We'll take one.
Good morning. Yeah, it's still morning. Okay. So I've been attending a lot of events like this and meeting with different leaders, and more recently I've been perplexed because I've been thinking about this over the last few years. And I often find, and this may be the pink elephant in the room, but it's not difficult to talk to leaders such as yourselves. And when I say leaders, I mean in the government sort of organizational chart, because I firmly believe that leadership is at all levels and innovation happens at all levels. But what I'm kind of struggling with is how do we empower employees and managers and certain executive levels to take this up, in that we see it sometimes, but we don't see it everywhere. Why isn't innovation the norm? Like, why is it the exception? And oh, you know, ESDC did this great thing on the Canada Learning Bond, and so did this, and NRCan is doing great things, but these tend to be like the unicorn examples. And often it's not the top levels that you have to convince, it's trickling down. And it's not that and I hate to use the word culture because I don't think that's what it is. I think that there is something in the system where you know, managers, middle managers are struggling to manage their day-to-day files while also now having to bring in innovation. And what does that mean? Whether you call it innovation or creativity, it is the buzzword today, but it's not something new, right? So how can we bring this in and make it a normalized sort of process versus it being, you know, the exception to the rule? Thank you.
Tim, would you like to?
I think it's a great observation, and I've felt for a long time that, like in our organization, as in others, we all have values, and everybody knows those values, whether it's respect, integrity, you know, whatever. There's this bundle of them that anybody who has worked for an organization like ours or any of the others, they know them from birth. If you want to have, whether it's culture or however you want to frame it, as part of your organization, innovation has to be one of those values. It has to be valued in the same way we value integrity. It has to be valued in the same way we value trust. The managers that you speak of that maybe aren't as comfortable with it or as free to speak about it or whatever, I think over time they would be more comfortable if they understood that their organization truly valued it, and not just as a passing thing, just that it's popular now, but it's something that is truly embedded within it. And then you start to see folks exhibit the behaviors that come with an organization that has a value that is innovation or creativity or whatever. So I think it's got to be a foundational issue.
So I certainly agree on the foundational point and kind of the values point for who you are as an organization and what you believe in. But I think you need to go beyond that, particularly if you want to accelerate. And so I think some of the examples we've been talking about are creating kind of the space for those positive examples to happen. But I would say that has to be twinned with shining a spotlight on it and recognizing it and rewarding it. Also talking about cases where folks have tried something and it didn't work, or didn't work as predicted or as well, to kind of normalize the fact that, if you're going to experiment, some things are going to go as predicted and some won't, and you have to have an organization that supports that as opposed to punishes it. In part, in creating those spaces, a number of us have created innovation labs or policy ignite, things, or internal challenges. These are all important ways of trying to unleash some of that youth and student networks. Networks, I remember when I was at PCO working with CRA on a kind of behavioral insights network as they, put it to practice. And then I think the final thing is, going beyond just having a value, you need to kind of build it into the performance expectations. And so, the question for managers, including senior managers, isn't why to do this, but why not?
Yeah, for me, it's really the how, because it ends up being a ticky box instead of, a process that should be embedded. And Sylvia, you talked about creating the conditions, so I'm just wondering what that looks like, and we should be sharing that, and this should be everywhere,
Yeah. I think it's a really great question, and I think about it a lot because I've heard others say it as well. You've heard that I am the champion for GovernX here in BC for our new professionals network, and they say exactly what you just said. A lot of support at the top. Then when it comes time for me to attend events or participate in them, the support isn't there. So I think that, so what I've done, you're talking about the how. So what I try to do is, like beyond saying I try to create the right conditions, is to really be out there being accessible, using multiple channels to convey my interest in innovation. And why I think it's important. So I wasn't an early adopter to using Twitter as a channel, by the way. I use it a lot now. For me, it's a way, you spoke about innovation. About recognition. So for me, that's a way to also show here are the sorts of things that I value in our organization. It's also reaching out to the various communities of practice. So we've got a team leaders community of practice, we have a middle managers community, we have an executives community, we have a network for our employees with disabilities, our Pride network. So I try to use as many different platforms to be able to reach out and say, well, what's going on? What are your ideas? How can I help? What are your barriers? And I find that just asking that simple question, like, what are the barriers and how can I help? Sometimes people aren't exactly sure because they will frame it in terms of a problem, but not necessarily, but to help me and people who can actually maybe move the marker for you is to help us understand how we can really get in there and address those barriers. And I've seen us take strides there, but it's not perfect. And the point around values is a really important one as well. So we just have to keep reaffirming it, and it should be the norm, and we should be encouraging that.
Thank you, Sylvie.
I just wanted to add 2 comments because Bob Chartier and I in the last session were talking a little bit about this. One is we should, as Sylvie said, consider this just part of us doing business. This is part of our jobs, is to actually, innovation is far out there, but continuous improvement is this day, every day, and from wherever you stand or sit. I think that's probably one of the most important pieces. The other one is, as Sylvie said, find the 2 people in the 12 that actually are open, have that open mind, open heart, open will, or find the 2 red tomatoes amongst the green tomatoes, and work together with them in the community of practice that they're situated within.
Thank you, Elliot, for the question, and thank you, Julie and Sylvie, for the responses. I think, Frank, do we have another question in the room as well?
Yes, we have at least 3 others. If you do want to contribute, just try and get your attention to me, and I'll try and slide you into the queue.
Great, thank you. So I think my question is in a similar vein. I'm wondering what risks you guys feel that we're not taking, that we need to be taking, in terms of making big decisions. We obviously have some very intractable, extremely overwhelming concerns in regards to climate change. I work for the Immigration and Refugee Board, and our numbers are only increasing. And I'm just wondering, I guess it's a kind of a 2-part question. One, do you think that we are being too safe in terms of the risks that we're taking in government and in leadership? Are our risks too safe? And then, I guess, what is it, what advice do you have for maybe newer, younger public servants that are interested in perhaps disrupting certain conventions but don't want to step on senior toes? Don't, you know what I mean? So yeah, that's my question.
Would you like to take yours?
Sure. I mean, it kind of goes back to the previous question, as you noted. I mean, I think it's just a fact. As an institution, the government is risk averse, or I should be, more precise, the public service. And in part, it's been a strength. I mean, it has served the country well continuously for over 150 years. But at the same time, it's a big ship that's harder to change the course of. And so, that balance between continuity and change is tough. I mean, I think a huge frontier, and something that, I really encourage people to think about, is how, we bridge from, a world, and certainly I came into a public service with, the view that it was kind of not only the guardian of the permanent problems, or challenges the country faces and the ideas, but also the generator of the ideas. And so I think, crossing the divide, and I think probably everyone in the room is there, that we're like at best going to generate just a small percentage of the ideas that are going to change kind of the course of our country or the world, but we need to be open, not only open to, but thinking about how we work with those people and networks outside of government who are going to be helping to shape those thoughts and then actually deliver on the actions. And that was the approach we took on climate change, where we knew a federal plan only is not going to do it. We had to work with the provinces, but more fundamentally, we had to work with communities and Indigenous people and business and youth, because not only to generate the ideas, but the commitment to taking action together. And so I think that the disruption is how you are open to that, push the envelope on moving towards more open policy making, and cultivate networks you may bring with you into government, be open to stepping outside of government, and I think we need to have a lot more interchanges and people flowing between levels of government, between civil society and into government or industry, so we can get more of that flow of ideas and that kind of interlinked network to develop more effective policy, disrupt some of the conventional thinking, and then have better traction on it when it actually comes time to implement it.
Thanks. So your first observation about our, are we too risk averse, or, and that as an institution, we are exceedingly risk averse, and there's no doubt that hinders creativity and the ability to sort of do things differently, but there's pockets of it where there's very, very good reason for that, and so like Stephen says, there's some rationale behind being risk averse in certain situations, and we do it well. I mean, it's part of why we live in a safe, sensibly run country. I do think, though, that over time, we probably have become more and more risk averse on that bundle of items that probably don't need to be quite so tightly held. That it's a safer position for us to see it as black and white and put everything in the one side and not do it. So it's a bit of a self-preservation. It's a more cautious way of doing it. So within an operation, if we sort of go under the premise that innovation in large part starts at the depths of the organization and in a broad way among little ideas and stuff, many of those things aren't necessarily governed by the same level of risk aversion that we need to have. And so as managers or team leaders or whomever's looking at it, the idea of loosening that, I think, is essential. Like, not, if you're in an operation where your job is you're on the end of the tether for the astronaut that's doing the spacewalk, well, there's not a lot of room to experiment there. I mean, it's pretty rigid, but that's not 100% of what we do. I mean, it's a fraction of what we do, and so there's this notion of being, responsibly. Take responsible risks, which I think is a very sensible thing, versus taking reckless risks, which you never want to get that. As a new entrant into the public service and junior, my advice is that's not necessarily a time to be, without caution. Some sensible risk taking, some well-advised risk taking. That's all well and good, but in the first stages of a career, and I don't know if my colleagues will differ in an opinion, but sensible caution with great advice is probably not a bad way to go.
Thank you, Tim.
I think I would just add a couple of things. The first point is that as a new professional, we've hired you for a reason. We do want your ideas. and persevere in bringing them forward. If you find, as I've along my career have found myself in a spot where, you know, I didn't find that was so conducive, then find a way to make yourself visible to others. I'm a big fan of volunteering for work within your own department. Get seen by others within your own sphere. Participate in networks. And you'll be amazed at how quickly people will go to you and see you as a valuable resource to the organization. And so the disruption part, I think, I have found many ways to be able to color within the lines, but still be able to move the marker forward. So just keep at it. We've hired you for a reason. We want your ideas. We want that blend of diversity of views. If you're not getting what you need from your workforce, Service Canada is hiring.
There you have it, Sylvie. Thank you. We do have a question actually from the virtual as well. I'll have that, Frank. Maybe I'll take the in-room in a minute. The question is from Rajan Babar, and the question is, during your innovative time, they must have faced resistance to change. How did they handle the situations, or how did they overcome that hurdle?
Well, it kind of leads off from Sylvie's comment, and it leads off from my earlier one with regards to green versus red tomatoes. For sure, at points in time, and one of the reasons why I'm probably here today is that I've had leadership that wasn't interested in innovative ideas or in really moving the bar on culture or continuous improvement or enhancing people or leadership in the organization. And you can see and hear those when your supervisor isn't in that place. And I had a really great buddy who was a consultant who was telling me about a client they were working with, and they were basically helping their client put together a strategy. The purpose of the exercise wasn't to put the strategy together, it was to actually see it through to implementation. And the consultant recognized that the client was going to put this on a shelf and wasn't going to focus on the people, cultural, leadership side of the organization that was needed to put this strategy in play. So the consultant fired the client. And that's really to Sylvie's point about there's always more opportunities and beyond her organization, and our CAN is doing great, right? So, I mean, yeah, if you find yourself stuck, then look for the way around, look for those that are aligned, and otherwise there is no shortage of opportunities once you start looking for them.
Thank you, Judy.
I was just going to say, often when I speak to people just joining the government or students, I say, well, you're joining a big institution and you're going to have to learn to be patient. But at the same time, I say, but you need to be suitably impatient. Mm-hmm. And I think, sure, you can change jobs. We're always looking for great people, including here in the region. But I mean, more to the point, I think there's increasingly receptivity to hearing views from all levels of the organization. And through fora like this, or direct meetings of senior managers with staff where you're talking to people on the front lines and not working just through management channels. You need to speak up, and I think that sense of responsibility. Part of our job is providing advice. Well, part of the responsibility that comes with that is doing your homework and then providing your views. I mean, there's moments when you need to do it, and there's a way to, but I remember one of our former clerks, telling myself and other colleagues, don't live with the regret of knowing that you have something to say and not saying it. I think the art is how you do it, but I would say, be impatient and be prepared and don't be afraid to speak up.
Thank you very much. As you can see, there's quite a few opportunities for those that are stuck in not being able to provide an innovative project moving forward. That is not the solution. So persistence does work. So I can speak from personal experience. But you have to be smart about how we proceed with that. Of course. Tim, I think this question is great because I think the idea journey is something that you have worked on as well. And I would like to point out that there was a tweet that we sent out that has the links that what Tim will point out. But I just wanted to ask you this question is, what are concrete actions or commitments that we can make at any level, whether it's a team or branch or department, that will remove barriers to innovation?
Well, I mean, the concrete stuff is beyond the culture piece, I think. I mean, the culture piece and what we speak about values and behaviors and so on, that has to happen, but there needs to be a tremendous amount of patience around that, because that is not something that can just happen on Monday. I mean, it's a longer process. But the concrete stuff is I think quite a bit more basic. I mean, it is establishing something in the organization that is a mechanism for capturing ideas. You know, I mean, and companies for years and years have had just like the suggestion box, which is, I mean, that's the crudest form of it. But we have more. I mean, we've developed more sophisticated ways of doing that, and the internet's helped and stuff. But you just need that mechanism so folks can feel the ability to. Without having to suffer the barriers that can exist of suggesting an idea to a team leader or a manager and having it shot down, just the ability to send an idea in and to have it there. I mean, that's one piece. You know, the second piece is from a manager's perspective is being completely open to listening to all of those ideas. That there's the notion that there's no bad ideas. Well, yeah, there's lots of bad ideas. So so we don't want to just sort of go that route, but being open and curious and understanding that folks in the organization do have a number of different thoughts, and so regularly viewing those and embedding that into the operation of the unit. You can set targets. I mean, there's nothing wrong with saying, look. We're going to come up with 5 ideas a month, and that's what it is. And we're going to have a conversation about 5 ideas a month and get a bit of a coalition talking about them. There's, those, whether they're successful or not, they do send a message to the organization that you're serious about putting things in place and not just saying, oh, we should, we're going to be a bit more innovative and so on. So I think there's a number of things that are very visible to the staff and actually work, and when we've had some success with it.
Thank you, Tim. Sylvie, I know that you've also worked on a lot of ideas as well in this case. And how do you process the ideas that are coming to you, and how do you kind of prioritize them, and how do you proceed with that?
I guess what I would say I think we need to include or find ways to include our employees more, our clients, in terms of helping us to define how we could be doing things differently. We have applied design thinking, I'm sure others have as well, and really trying to bring in new methodologies to generate ideas and then solutions, and then how can we actually bring them to life. I would say that the point around, we need to have that feedback loop, which I think is where Tim was going with, yeah, there are some bad ideas, is that we need to have ways that people bring forward their ideas, we kick them around, then we say, well, no, it's not going to work for these reasons, not just, no, go away. And so in terms of how we've, I keep going back to the communities of practice, and it might just be because I work in such a large organization, so it doesn't just come to me. I'm not like the one person. So we have our team leaders, community of practice, and they have developed really interesting approaches to support their own team leaders community and how they can be continuing to learn and innovate and adjust our practices. And the same thing with our middle managers. And so the point is that ideas have, people can feel safe in bringing forward their ideas. They get kicked around, and then you either retain them or you don't. In a large organization as well, I hear we've got a lot of folks who work at our call centers, and those are demanding jobs. And it's around how do you create space for those people to be able to generate ideas themselves. So building in opportunities for their ideas. You have to plan ahead so that that is a possibility. But it requires all of us working together to be able to harness those ideas, discuss them, and move on. There was just a recent unconference that took place in Victoria earlier this week. How many of you were there? So I'm just so glad to see there was such a good turnout at the unconference. But there, for example, was a new way to be able to bring together people from across Canada, fly the flag, have an unstructured approach to developing the actual agenda. And so it's about having our ear open. I don't know if it's red tomatoes. It's really finding ways to support and allow those ideas to bubble up, and then to find ways to support it. So it's more of an art than a science, and I'm sure that Judy and Stephen are just wriggling in their chairs at me saying that. But it really is an art, and then you sort of set those receptivity in the organization for people to bring forward their views.
Thank you very much, Sylvie. I think we will go to a question in the room, Frank. And if you can please introduce yourself as well.
Okay. Hi, my name is Amin. I'm from Service Canada. And when I think of innovation, I'm reminded of the idea that you have to be comfortable with the unknown, which reminds me of a quote from Sheryl Sandberg in her book Lean in which she essentially says that you must reduce your career spreadsheet to one idea, which is opportunity for growth. Which makes me think then, how can we be innovators in government if all we've ever known is this environment? Do you think it's critical that we cross sectors, whether it's private, academic, or nonprofit, in order to become equipped innovators? And lastly, how much has cross-sector experience been a part of your careers individually? Thank you.
So articulate. Thank you. I'll try to be the same. I think that in terms of, the whole, so I loved her book, by the way, and I handed it out like candy for people to give a thought to how women could approach their careers. I don't have children myself, but I really appreciated the messages in her book in terms of leaning in terms of always staying engaged in the workforce and contributing as much as one could, and to not sort of self-screen out. I'm going to try not to go off on a tangent, but I continue to be amazed at how many people will self-screen out their ideas. They won't bring them forward. To your point, they might have an idea they wish they'd talked about and didn't. Like, how often does that happen? We should find a way to minimize that. I think in terms of the continuing to develop, continuing to really stay curious, that's really important. I think that my main message around being innovative and that the environment, if it's sort of not leading to creativity and ideas coming forward, like, that is not my experience. I have been in a situation where it has been my experience, but there are ways to address that, to move beyond it, to wiggle around it, but there are also ways to address it. And so I'm sorry that I have to come here today to get a chance to hear from somebody who's on my team, but I'd really be interested in discussing this with you a little bit further, because I think it's really important what you're bringing forward.
I was just going to note quickly, I noted earlier, to my mind, the importance of more cross-sectoral movement, whether through formal interchanges or micro assignments. But I think if we're open to the ideas and working with others and getting that diversity of views, I mean, that can be done through informal networks. Like I said, through, convening a small group of experts or folks outside of government to get their views, and to, taking or networks we may have from our personal life, from volunteer work, from academic experience, and harnessing and building those, because through that you're not only helping shape your own thinking and that of government, but your broader environment through your interaction with those people who can then carry the message, including understanding what government does and that it can be a force for good in their country.
I just wanted to add a couple of points. So a forester by trade, and I'm still operating in forest sciences, and I've spent my whole career in forestry, and most from Ottawa will go, "Ugh, you're broken, there's no agency, there's no central agency background, there's no Ottawa experience." I'm good with that. Because I have served private sector, I've worked with academia, I've worked in the provincial government, I've worked in the federal government, I've actually sat in the legislature for the BC government next to my minister, which is something most of my Ottawa DG colleagues will have never done, right? But to your bigger point, and then probably the most important one, is that state of mind, right? So it's about setting yourself up on the biggest wave you're ready to ride as a surfer, as per Tim Galloway's book, in and around really taking that challenge. And that's The Inner Game of Tennis, which is another really great read. So go ahead and grow, but at any point in time, be ready to set yourself up for the next challenge. Just take it on. Ride the wave.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the question. That was a very engaging question, actually. So we will put question number 5 that is going out on Twitter. And I think, Sylvie, this would very much, you would love to respond to this one. And how can staff in a client-facing and operational setting feel more empowered to solve problems and innovate? And I think this is something I hear all the time when I'm speaking to a lot of public servants in the regions and in NCR.
Yeah. So I talked a little bit about our Service Canada call centers. We've got our folks who are at the Service Canada centers when people are coming in, for example, to get their passports, or they have questions around employment insurance or with respect to old age security, just to give you a bit of a lay of the land of what that could look like. Some of the, and these are some of our harder jobs because they're client-facing. They don't have time to, even like the emails that we'll send or offering up opportunities for people to engage and bring forward their ideas. They don't have time. And so the most important thing that we can do is build that time in and plan way ahead. So we know when our summer peaks will be for our employment insurance. For example, when teachers will be off for the summer. We know when we're going to have spikes in guaranteed income supplement at the end of March, and so it's about planning ahead, building in that time purposefully, and ensuring that there's an opportunity for all of our employees to be able to contribute should they wish to do so. And it's also about engaging them in our design thinking. So how can we be more effective at dealing with our clients, bringing together a subset to help inform us. Our Chief Operating Officer, Leslie McLean, has been out to our regional operations several times, and she will engage with our employees and say, how can we support you more? Oh, you're right. Look at the technology that we've given you. It really isn't so helpful in terms of being able to be as effective as possible. What more could we be doing? And so it's about being persevering, being really determined, and doing that planning ahead of time in those high production environments where you can't just take 5 minutes away from your desk and do additional work. So we're looking at best practices internationally. There are other organizations who are also having to think about innovation in their work, whether it's call centers, others who deliver services. But perhaps and we are positioning ourselves in terms of transforming for the future, going digital. What does that mean? What does that mean for our clients? How do we protect their privacy? And our employees have really great ideas around what that looks like, how that could be improved. So it's multi-pronged. How's that? Multi-pronged.
Stephen? Just 2 thoughts on that. I'm not in an organization that has a direct service delivery in the same way, although we do predict the weather that folks
I'm looking at it every day.
Just a quick anecdote on that. We have our weather app, highlighted at the booth here, but I mean, recognizing how people get their information, I said to our senior team, we should develop an app for the weather. I mean, there's lots of competition in the market in one level, but another, none of them are connected to the people who are kind of at ground zero in predicting the weather through our meteorological service. We had a discussion going on about whether we should contract out the work or develop it internally. Meanwhile, a group of students in one of our centers went off and kind of developed it. And so by the time we were ready to have our conclusive discussion, one of the chief information officers said, well, by the way, our students we'll bring them in by video and they're going to show you what they developed. And that kind of answered the question for us. We did it in-house. And with that great talent. But to your point, I was just going to, or question, I think rules matter. Often rules in government define what you can't do or set strict parameters. So one of the things that we've looked at, and I had the privilege of co-chairing the Deputy Committee on Policy Innovation, not only with deputies, but young public servants around the table, was to develop some positive rules, like what we will allow. Microgrants, for example, prizes and competitions as different ways of getting outcomes than standard contribution agreements. And so thinking about those rule sets, and in particular when they're changed, making sure that you don't have ghost rules haunting a department with people believing that they're still there and you can't do things, as important responsibility for managers to look at, but for employees, to raise their hand and think about. The other thing, and I think this is something we're hearing a lot about now, is kind of defining innovation sandboxes. So if you're in the front line, kind of understanding that parameter space where you can make local decisions and find solutions. I mean, frankly, that's one of the things that we need more of in addressing the challenges of the pay system, where you can look at having an ability to do end-to-end solutions, kind of within a sandbox to actually solve the problems.
Thank you very much. So we would love to continue this conversation. We do have quite a few questions coming in from our virtual side, and I believe there's another question in the room. Unfortunately, we have reached the end of the hour. We would love to be able to hold our guests here for another hour and close the door, but we will be probably booted out of this room for the next event. And I would like to thank our guests, Steve, Julie, Sylvie, and Tim. Thank you very much for your time out of your busy days to join our chat today. For the folks online, the hour may be over, but the conversation continues, and this goes on for days on end. There's a lot of public servants who are very dedicated and who continue to have these conversations in between the virtual chats. So we'd love to hear from you as well on that one. Over the next few days, the Leaders GC team will review all the tweets and post a wrap-up of all the tweets for this chat. So stay tuned to our Twitter account, and we will post that usually within the next few days. As a team of volunteers, Leaders GC team works on our monthly chats above and beyond our regular daily duties. And I would like to especially thank Mary Lestage, who was the lead for this event. Thank you, Mary. And I would like to other volunteers, Owen, who's been working tirelessly for getting our tech up and running here virtually from all the way from Ottawa. We've been emailing him. And Ali Khan in Toronto, who has been very supportive as well. So thank you very much, and thank you for your time, everybody.